Well, hey guys, this is going to be a very special video. It's one I've been planning for at least a year. I had hoped to make this time last year, but I fell and I hurt my knee the night that I investigated the big landslide up there, where the bike paths are going in. I'm here at the Cahokia Mounds on the American Bottoms. Now, you may think that sounds like a porno movie. And many people have been saying I should make one, but this is actually just an educational video. So I hope you sit down and enjoy. Let me explain to you why I referred to this as the American Bottoms. It's a historical title for this region to distinguish the east bank of the Mississippi River, which belonged to the United States after the American Revolution before the Louisiana Purchase, from the west bank, which belonged to France. Actually, up until 1763 and the end of the War of the Austrian Succession, French and Indian Wars, we refer to it. All this land also belonged to France, but at that time, after the war, 1764, the French settlers in this region picked up and they moved across the river and settled the city that's now called St. Louis. Right behind me were these mounds. When the Jesuit missionaries first appeared here, they said, "What are these things?" Only a few of them remain, but at one time there were 30 of them. 34 of them, I think. And the Indians living here had no idea. And then when the American settlers came, they demolished a lot of the mounds. This mound behind me, Monk's Mound, named after the monks, the Jesuit priests, is the largest man-made earthen structure in the Northern Hemisphere, or North America at least. It used to be a lot larger, but farmers would borrow from it for fill dirt. They destroyed several of the other mounds around here. They said, there's no way this is not an Indian feature. This is just some kind of hill left over for some reason. And in the 1960s, that same attitude kind of prevailed, and they wanted to build a highway through here. But folks sued. They got an archaeological study done, and now this is a state park. The studies that have been done here have been really fascinating, because around 1100 AD, it is believed that more human beings lived in this general area than lived in Paris, France. It's what they consider a proto-state or proto-civilization. Not quite one, but on the cusp of becoming one, right outside a major metropolitan area with Tier 1 research universities. In past videos, I've mentioned how that cities and towns tend to spring up in places where the geography encourages it. St. Louis is one of those places. Just above St. Louis, the Mississippi River has a set of rapids that make it impossible to take a canoe or a raft or a steamboat any further. Today, there is a lock and dam system to get around it. On the other side of those rapids, as you find many times, there's two other streams flowing in. You often find rapids below confluence of streams. You have the Missouri, the Illinois, and the Mississippi coming together. And so this was a natural place where people traveling, even back into prehistoric times, trading goods, would come together, and they would have to get out of their boat. All through this region, though, for hundreds of years, thousands of years before this particular site became big, there were large Indian villages. It's very fertile land. Nobody really knows why this is the one that succeeded where others were less successful. Well, you can't say that there's a large creek here that's large enough to bring a canoe up. And the site itself is a few miles off the Mississippi River, so not as prone to major flooding. And there was an oxbow lake left over from a previous meander of the Mississippi River, full of fish, attracting a lot of birds and wildlife, and also provided a clean supply of drinking water. So it had certain advantages, and maybe that's why this one grew so large. Whatever the case, around the year 1050, the population of this place exploded. Again, no one really knows why, but people have drawn connections between this location and locations further south of Mexico. For example, the cultivation of corn happened here whereas earlier Indians used beans and squash and things like that. Also, you have the presence of large platform mounds. I've made videos at Indian mounds before, and they're usually these round or cone-like structures. This actually has two platforms. Where you walk up, there's a flat space. You walk up, there's a flat space. On those flat spaces, there's evidence that, shrines, temples, residences lived, and at the larger ones, there were even palisades, stockades, indicating that someone very important lived there. They're arranged around a central plaza that had been flattened probably by thousands and thousands of people walking over it. Perhaps that religious festivals were held specifically for the purpose of leveling it out and dumping the dirt there. Again, it reminds you that the early American settlers said this thing's far too large for Indians have created with their primitive tools. We know now that that happened. They played a game called Chunky, which involved a ball and human sacrifice, much like you found in Mexico. And they had a bird-man, a man dressed up as a bird and was revered as a religious feature or figure. I'm going to get into why exactly this is considered a proto-state or a proto-civilization. It was a paramount chiefdom, meaning it wasn't just a simple chiefdom. It had chiefs ruling over chiefs, at least 3 levels. It had satellite communities, colonies that it had settled. It had a tribute network for dozens, if not hundreds of miles around, where outlying villages had to send in slaves, human sacrifices, deer, gems, whatever they found that was of interest to this community. And the religion, Chunky, and its Birdman and its ball game spread not only throughout this region, but as far south as Ocala, Florida, east and into parts of South Carolina, documented by early French and Spanish explorers and settlers. It flourished up until about 1250 and then disappeared by 1450. And as I noticed, when the French first started penetrating this area around 1650, 1700s, the Jesuits spoke to the Indians. Nobody had any idea what this was here. And there's been some speculation that that was caused by the end of the medieval warm period, which was a period where the sun's output was higher than normal, and the northern hemisphere was warmer than northern, more fertile. The population of Europe boomed. Possibly the population of this area boomed, and as it cooled, the people went further south into the region John noted and started large, what we would call Indian kingdoms, tribes at Natchez, Mississippi, Utah, in Georgia, and some of the areas in the Carolinas and Georgia coast that Fernando de Soto mentioned in his writings. Whatever the case, by 1450, this was abandoned. It's still a matter of speculation as to how it collapsed that hard. Some people say it could have been a civil war. Others say it could have been an epidemic. I would backtrack a little bit and just talk about a couple other features. It had a wood hinge. A wood hinge, kind of like a Stonehenge, where they found logs, poles planted in the ground that at different times of the year, the shadow of the sun would indicate whether it was time to plant certain crops, whether it was time to have a religious festival, when winter was coming, things like that. And also, they found evidence that this site wasn't simply Stone Age. They had begun to work metal. Not iron, not bronze, but they were able to work copper. Earlier Indians had made trinkets out of copper. The Indians who lived here made breastplates out of copper. They made armor, which was axes, which is what enabled them to exert dominance over this whole area. But for whatever reason, it collapsed. And now I'm going to get back to that reason. There's other things, primitive human dwellings, that explain perhaps what happened. Nobody knows exactly how many people lived here. Some people have speculated as high as 30,000. Certainly it was at least 7,000. probably in the 12 to 13,000 range. We have refugee camps, we have music festivals, Burning Man, things like that have allowed us to look at what happens when human beings live in primitive circumstances in a small area. At first they cooperate, they work with each other, they're friendly, they help each other out. But once you get up to around 6,000 to 7,000 people, it changes. You start getting gangs. Life becomes a lot harder. You start fighting over food because it's not as easy to get. Drinking water isn't easy to get. Sewage and trash builds up very quickly. Even the most fertile land becomes overtaxed. Very possible that that's what happened here. The key distinguishing mark between a civilization and a tribe is the presence of engineering. Whether that's aqueducts or just trenches or a system of canals to bring fresh water in, irrigation. Whatever the case, before engineering, there's no civilization. There's no example of a civilization emerging without engineering. This is simple biological necessity. And it's one of the reasons why I harp so much on the situation in Clarksburg with our water and our sewer. We're approaching a point where just life in Clarksburg becomes hostile, where the environment becomes hostile to human life because we haven't taken care of the engineering aspects, because we don't have adequate rule of law to keep gangs and criminal elements, bullies, competition in order. And there's your history lesson. Cahokia, Illinois. This is Mounds Mound, the largest man-made earth structure in North America, built around 1050 AD, almost 1,000 years ago. I'll holler at you later.